Hello everyone, this is RaySpace and welcome back to Realism Overhaul Sandbox and Kerbal Space Program 1.12. Having tested the SLS Block II from Artemis Construction Kit, I decided to put it to use. And first of all, I'm going to try out the Goku Lander. Yes, this is a lander. It is also a return craft. It is meant for a direct landing on the moon and return. So no docking, no refueling, nothing. And it is designed to launch on the Kasei rocket. So it's 8.4 meters in diameter in its Hydrolox version. There's also a Methalox version. But the margins on the Goku Lander are very tight because it has to do so many different things. And it is heavier than the capacity of the SLS Block II to the moon. So we've got a problem right there. And the question is actually whether I can launch it with a modified upper stage on SLS. So instead of EUS, we're going to have a larger upper stage to better optimize SLS. But because right now the core is doing too much, actually, if you take a look at the Delta V. So if we take off the EUS, and well, the EUS right there has a bit of a problem because the top of the tank clips into the decoupler at the bottom of the Goku Lander, so we don't want that either. So I'll be using procedural tanks, but I'll still use the RL10C3s that I have right there. Those are ones that I had made from, I forget which mod pack that I have those in. And so I'm using a procedural tank here, so that definitely doesn't clip in. I'm using the truss version of the procedural parts for the first time, I think. To make my little stage. It's going to look like EUS, it's just bigger. So we've got a bigger hydrogen tank and a bigger oxygen tank, and I'm going to have 6 RL10s. So basically about 50% larger overall. Same burn time. So the question is whether that will help us out, or whether this is still not going to be enough. I didn't have my fancier textures here. I didn't have the Freedom texture pack. I really wanted the cryogenic textures from that. But yeah, well, we've got the orange textures we've got. So, alright. There we've got the procedural parts. One thing I forgot here, though, is that I didn't put MLI layers. And so on the first launch, we're going to have boil off, and that's no good. We need this stage to be able to capture the Goku Lander into orbit around the moon, because otherwise the Goku Lander does not have enough Delta V to return. And also I need this stage to be able to attach to the core. It doesn't have a node, that's why I'm putting the radial attachment point. We have to sort of haphazardly try to attach it like that, and then I move the radial attachment point to try and get it right. So there we go, nudging it in the right direction, getting it all lined up. So that's a possible issue where, you know, the colliders on the inner stage might collide with the truss bit that we have there. And it turns out that that's all right. The colliders on this were made very well, and we don't have that problem. Alright, so off we go. I am using ascent guidance again with the numbers that you see. All this was done during a live stream on Twitch, which will become relevant soon. Also, I was sort of aware that the heat shield that I put on the pod probably wasn't updated for Realism Overhaul because I haven't used the Goku Lander in a long time, and as a result, it was probably not going to work. So we sort of have condemned the crew to a fiery fate at the end, but I was aware of that. I'm just trying to test whether the spacecraft ends up with enough Delta V to do what it needs to do. The ascent guidance extended the solar panels automatically once we reach space. I didn't necessarily mean for it to do that, but I hadn't unchecked that particular choice. But yeah, this is about whether SLS Block II can actually do this potentially without the EUS. It would need this bigger upper stage, and the whole business of the heat shield, I'm gonna have to fix that separately. If we get to that part, you know, that's more or less successful. Alright, so we have reached orbit, and we have enough to transfer. And we do have a fair amount of Delta V to capture as well after we transfer, except that there's going to be boil off because I forgot the MLI layers. The texture I use for the hydrogen tank sure is radiant. It really glows in the dark. I guess that's helpful for seeing the craft in the dark, though the Goku pod itself seems to be pretty glowy as we go over to the moon, departing the Earth. and slow down using these RL10s. But due to the boil off, we only had about 400 meters per second, which is enough to capture, but not enough to get to a low lunar orbit. And so that got expended with us still needing to do about 400 meters per second. So we'll have to do that with the lander itself. But its engines are facing backwards, you might notice. So I have to reverse the control point on the pod. It was controlling the stack already. So up to command. Well, eventually I'll get there. Okay, and switch it. And don't let the panels hit the spent stage there. We do knock the spent stage like that, but that's okay. We have a non-functional nose cap, and maybe I should make that jettisonable considering the way things go with the margins here. Also, I am using RSS Reborn, so you might see some seams on the lunar surface. We passed one right there. Alright, we've got landing legs deployed. I think there was an Israeli lander for the moon that was sort of shaped like this. I might have gotten inspiration from that. It's just sort of vaguely the same idea with these stilt-like legs and conical body, if I remember correctly. Anyway, here we go, and unfortunately I was talking to my stream chat, and that caused me to not handle this perfectly. Also, I forgot that the RCS on this was really bad. The RCS is very weak. You can see they're very small apertures on the pod, so it doesn't have really powerful RCS, and that means that it's really hard to steer it if you're really far off. And yeah, well, this is not going to work very well. Yep. And somehow the solar panel's really strong. I don't know why the solar panels are really strong, but they were really strong. The heat shield sure wasn't. Well, we have to adjust the heat shield configuration anyway. So, comes to a sliding halt, but things need to be fixed. First of all, of course, I need to put MLI layers on these tanks, but I thought you would enjoy the crash on the moon there anyway. And also I decided to reduce the amount of ablator on the heat shield because even with the MLI layers, it seemed like we would be a little bit short on the delta V. So I was trying to eke out as much as possible, so I reduced the ablator on the heat shield. And what I didn't know at this point is that instead of having 4 people in the pod, I had 6. It has room for 6. And so we're carrying more Kerbals than we're supposed to. But really, if you get down to that tight a situation, your mission is probably not NASA approved, let's face it. There are a few things about this that are not NASA approved. First of all, you've got the heat shield exposed on the lunar surface, so it's gonna get dust and all that stuff, or whatever regolith on it, and that's not great. You know, I could have micrometeorite impacts along the way, so probably back in particular. So that wouldn't be any good. And then the margins are super tight. So this is a nifty idea, but it's better implemented if we have more delta V. Another problem is that it doesn't have a launch escape system, and it would need a very large launch escape system because it's not just a pod, but it's effectively the service module as well. The whole lander fuel is part of it. So that would not be good. And a way to solve that problem is to have crew transfer to it in orbit, so launch it uncrewed and then have crew transfer to it. But that's an extra step that we weren't supposed to have to do. I also was supposed to put covers on the engines, you know, the ones that are on the lander facing upward. Right now it's just bare nozzles facing upward, which wouldn't be any good because they would get stuff inside. There are supposed to be covers on it that are animated and open up. That was part of the original idea, but I got lazy. So if I plan to use this more regularly, I will try to fix that, but I haven't really used it very much since I made it and first introduced it. Nifty idea, but those are the flaws, basically. Dry mass of the pod is about 17 tons. So right there, it got us into a low orbit around the moon. So the stage did its job. And all the fuel in the lander is for landing and then returning to Earth. But there seemed to be another flaw with the lander, and that's that the hydrogen and oxygen did not seem to be very well balanced. Now, the fuel inside should be exactly the right fuel for these engines. Everything was made at the same time. I calculated the fuel load for it based on the engines that were fitted to it, not any other engines. So why there should be an imbalance, I'm not sure. In theory, I would have configured the RCS to use the same fuel mix as well. And you might say, well, you know, maybe the hydrogen boiled off faster than the oxygen, but we have more hydrogen. We have a surplus of hydrogen. So what ends up happening as we land here is that we have just a little bit too little delta V because we don't have the right fuel mix. And again, everything to do with the Goku Lander is very tight, so I have to dump some supplies. I mean, this is simulating them staying on the surface for like a week anyway, so that's alright. But we also have the fact that we have 6 Kerbals inside instead of 4, which is not great. And I probably should have reduced the supply load in it from the start, so we have been carrying more than we should have from the beginning. But anyway, I tried to get to orbit. Also, there's that nose cone. Maybe we should have had a Kerbal explode that nose cone or something. We reach orbit with like just above 800 meters per second, and the trip back takes 823. And then of course we need RCS repellent for re-entry, but we would be expecting to still have the residuals, like 1% left over, because the engines can't use that part, so that part can be used for RCS anyway. I decided to abandon my hitchhikers and just throw them out to see if that would help, and we would have gotten just the right amount of delta V basically. But while I was trying to rebalance the resources, I accidentally dumped all the water. So yeah, well obviously that wouldn't be any good. It just dumped the water too quickly for me to react there, so I reverted to when the lander was on the surface and kicked the 2 Kerbals out there and rebalanced the supplies while we were on the surface so we didn't launch with them, and tried it again. That will lead us to have more delta V in orbit. It is a bit unsavory to just kick out some Kerbals and leave them stranded on the lunar surface with no hope of rescue. But anyway, this was just a test. They'll reincarnate anyway. So here we are making orbit, and we have 882 meters per second left, and once again we take about the same amount of delta V to get back, basically 822. So that part is okay. So we can get back. So settling the fuel down, and ignition. But all the while I knew that the heat shield was probably going to be a problem. So we have made it. There's 63 meters per second left. You can see the imbalance between the hydrogen and oxygen a little bit better now. It's very tiny, but it's something. And those are precious meters per second that we did not have as a result. So the overall verdict is that this seems all a little bit too tight. I mean, we had to kick those Kerbals out. We really don't have huge margins to work with, and that's not good. It's clearly not NASA approved. So maybe the Goku Lander should stick to being launched on top of the Kasei rocket. Even then it wouldn't have a launch escape system. It is an interesting idea, but not really safe as such. I decided to go to map view to see where we were coming down, but the heat shield exploded while we were in map view, and the pod exploded soon after. That's just a configuration fix that needs to happen. I need to tell Realism Overhaul that this is a Realism Overhaul heat shield and convince it shouldn't have 1073 Kelvin of heat tolerance when it's got the ablator on. It did still have the ablator on even though I reduced some ablator. Yeah, so anyway, that was testing the Goku Lander with the SLS Block II, and it was just a little bit too tight. So with that, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do press like. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.